Good afternoon. My name is Isan Taylor with I Love the Berg, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our next installment of the History Half Hour. These free history tours are made possible in part by the City of St. Petersburg, Florida, the St. Petersburg Downtown Partnership, and with special thanks to the St. Petersburg Museum of History. We're about to get started with today's host, Monica Kile, who's live at Bayboro Harbor. Her husband, Jon Kile, is going to be running the presentation for us today, so you're going to get a cool mix of live footage as well as some slides with historic photos. We hope you enjoy. If you have a question during our live tour, please feel free to use the comment section. We're going to do our best to work in as many of your questions during the live show as possible. Once again, thanks for joining us. Be sure to follow I Love the Berg on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as well as subscribing to our newsletter to stay up to date on our next history tour, the latest news, exclusive deals, and all things good in the Berg. Monica, over to you.
Isa. I am standing at the kind of the tip of Bayboro Harbor in front of what is today known as the College of Marine Science of USF. I am in a place that I would venture a guess 95% of the population of St. Petersburg has never been to, unless maybe you're a long distance runner, because my running group and I come down here on a weekly basis because it adds some distance. Jon, why don't you show people where we are? You'll notice when Andrew turns around in a minute, there's a lot of water behind us, which makes for a lot of wind right now. So we're going to try and work with that as best we can. But Jon, why don't you show where we are on the map?
Yeah, here we have a map of downtown St. Pete, and that red star indicates where Monica is standing, kind of out on a spit of land out in Bayboro Harbor, which is south of Albert Whitted Airport there. I'll just say one thing about this area. It has been kind of named the Innovation District because so many USF, Pointer Institute, the USGS, Fish and Wildlife. There's so many different scientific and medical and educational institutes down there. It's a really interesting area that Monica's going to be covering today. And just to give you a sense of where she's going to go, I'll zoom in a little. She's starting out on the point there at the tip of the College of Marine Science. She's going to kind of work her way through campus, kind of through the edge of campus, some historic buildings that you may not know about, up 4th Street, and then back around to some of the oldest structures in St. Petersburg that rest over there now.
Back to me, Jon?
Back to you, Mon.
All right.
That's your cue.
That's my cue. Okay. I can't see the screen. Andrew's got the pictures over there. So, as I said, I'm standing in front of the College of Marine Science, but that's not what this building was built for. And the interesting part about it is this is actually the front of the building. And Andrew, if you would turn around real quick so they can get a sense of the harbor behind us. And that's the Coast Guard station you're seeing off in the distance. And as he goes a little bit around to the south, you're going to see more of the Coast Guard station. You'll see actually go over that way, Andrew, a large Coast Guard, or would that be a cutter? I'm not sure. But the Coast Guard station actually sits on both sides of Bayboro Harbor. The south side is where that ship is, and then the north side is where these white buildings with the red roofs are, including a large white building, a really large white building. There's an airplane. It was built as an airplane hangar in the late 30s, so 1937, 38. The Coast Guard station was actually originally started in 1924 to be a base for anti-bootlegging operations. So during the era of prohibition, when there was no alcohol allowed, bootleggers were smuggling in alcohol through Florida's coastline. So the Coast Guard was situated here for anti-smuggling purposes. When prohibition was lifted in 1933, they decommissioned the base, then reopened it later in the late 30s with an air base on the north side of the harbor. And that's when that large hangar was built. It was built with Works Progress Administration money. So in the officers' mess hall on the walls, which if you ever get a chance to tour the Coast Guard station, which I've done, you should take it, because on the walls of the officers' mess hall are paintings by George Snow Hill, who was a famous WPA muralist whose work also adorns City Hall. There's some over at the Tampa airport and some various places. So the location of the Coast Guard station is what spurred the siting of the building of this building behind me, which was the base for the Maritime Services Training Station. Now, what that was is a service that trained merchant seamen, the merchant mariners. And I had to figure out what a merchant mariner was. Those are the men and women that really staff the ships that carry all of our cargo and our freight. And they are particularly important during wartime. So in 1939, 2 ships are sailed into Bayboro Harbor, and they become the temporary training site for the Maritime Services Training Center while these buildings are being built. So the building behind me was the administration building for the Maritime Services Center. Behind it, there was another building that were bunks and barracks. That building has since been demolished. But the training center was situated here because of its proximity to the Coast Guard. It originally was going to be awarded to Tampa. Tampa was all excited to have it. During the Depression, cities were really fighting against each other to try to get these military services because they get this defense money into their city. Tampa was also vying for an airfield, which ended up becoming MacDill, when they realized that the Maritime Services Training Station might jeopardize their chance at getting MacDill. They dropped their bid for it, and St. Pete kind of came in and swooped it up. So the Maritime Services Training Center was situated here in 1939. The barracks were opened and dedicated in 1941. And they, over the course of World War II, they trained some 25,000 seamen here at this location. So think about those tens of thousands of military men, or excuse me, not military men. So the Merchant Marines are not a branch of the military. They were originally underneath the umbrella of the Coast Guard, but by 1942, they are moved into their own kind of division, the U.S. Merchant Marines. They are not a part of the War Department. So they are not military. They are civilians. They can leave at any time. But as John will talk about in a minute, they're in some ways trained very much like military when they're learning everything they have to do on these ships, because a war could not function without these seamen manning the ships that are moving our cargo, our things in wartime like tanks, guns, artillery, ammunition, and the troops are all moved on these large ships during wartime. Over the course of World War II, some 6,000 merchant mariners are killed, mostly in German submarine attacks. There's 700 merchant ships that are sunk during World War II. So many so that this memorial, if Andrew will back up just a little bit, and I'll get him to see if he can get a good shot of it. We have a guest catcher on the tour with us today. It's called a cenotaph. It's a memorial basically to those that went out to sea and never came back. So during the course of World War II, 6,000 merchant mariners were lost. That's more, they suffered more casualties than any branch of the military, save for the Marines, and they suffered more deaths than any branch of the military, which is pretty significant considering they weren't even a branch of the military.
Per capita, Monica.
Per capita.
The rate,
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, that makes sense. So I'm glad you clarified that, because I know that the people that trained here and the other branches of the military are very serious about this, and I want to do it justice, because a lot of people came through here, and so few people know about the history of this part of our city. So these thousands of men came through here. When the barracks were too full, because they had so many trainees coming through here, they actually got they got put up at the Vinoy and the Sereno hotels. All the hotels in St. Petersburg and throughout the state really were used by military, because the weather was so great in Florida, you could do training here all year round. So all of our hotels, mostly in St. Petersburg, go to military uses. So including some of the Maritime Services training, the trainees. When the base is decommissioned in 1950, local leaders realized that it's a perfect educational setting. That's what it was built for. It's got classrooms, it's got dorms, and they start lobbying for various educational entities to come in here. It gets rented by a school for disabled children. The saltwater fisheries division of the conservation division of the state goes in here, and actually is still here under another name now. It's the Fish and Wildlife Commission. So they've been here, gosh, more than 50 years. But city leaders are really hoping to bring in a university, because there's only 3 universities at the state at this time: Florida State, maybe even Florida State College for Women at that point, University of Florida, and FAMU. So Gainesville and Tallahassee. But there's thousands of GIs looking to go to school on the GI Bill. So they're looking to build another university, ends up getting put in Tampa, but there was some hard lobbying for USF to be put here. When that didn't happen, city leaders talked with the Florida Synod of the Presbyterian Church. So Florida was the only state in the lower 48 to not have a Presbyterian college. City leaders here said about trying to change that, and they pitch an area down near the Skyway, where today's Eckerd College is, as a site for a university. But while they're building that, they rent space here. So for the first 3 years of what is now Eckerd College's existence, they used these buildings behind us for classroom and dormitory. We're going to show you some pictures of that. It then evolves, and I'm going to tell you more about its evolution becoming USF in just a moment. But Andrew and I are going to walk down towards the Albert Whitted Airport, and John's going to show you some pictures of this when it was the training station.
Yeah, so this first picture that's going to pop up here in just a second is a picture of the Joseph Conrad, which is actually a Danish ship built in 1882. That was one of the first ships to be used by the Training Services Center there. And this is actually a photo of them doing an abandoned ship drill, which they would do at all hours, day and night, training men to abandon ship. That Joseph Conrad is actually still around. It's up in Mystic, Connecticut now. It's been there since I want to say it was the 1960s when it moved up there, and is part of like a camp program, like a training program. But these men were learning every aspect of sea life, and most of the ships that were used at that time were not tall ships like this one, and would have been more modern steamships, which we also had at the training center. But they were learning every aspect of sea life, classroom work, how to cook on a ship, what to cook on a ship. There was very elaborate rules about how to store meat and how you could serve meat cheaply and safely, machine work, all sorts of things. Here's a great shot of the Vinoy with the trainees in front of it, and you can imagine, you look out, if you can look really closely, there are actually a lot of men up on the seawall there, presumably who were staying at the Vinoy while they watched these drills go on. Here is Eckerd College cleaning up after a water fight in one of the dorms there, and then a great shot of them moving out to move into their new location down by the Skyway. There's a good aerial photo of that Coast Guard station that was kind of off in the distance there. You can see it has a swimming pool and kind of your classic military style buildings. That hangar up near the top there dates back to the 1930s, and has been there ever since it was a kind of an air station as well. And finally, some shots that Monica took many years ago of those George Snow Hill murals, which are reminiscent of ones that he has up in Tampa International Airport, and the one that's remaining at City Hall, which has a great story attached to it as well. And Monica is probably coming around the corner to
John,
Albert Whitted Airport. Yeah.
I wanted to add about the Coast Guard station. This is called Sector St. Petersburg, and it's actually one of the Coast Guard's largest commands. It has an area of responsibility that encompasses more than 400 nautical miles of coastline, including the port of Tampa, which is the third largest port in the United States for domestic trade. I thought that was interesting. I think it's 11th if you include international trade as well. But the Coast Guard has 5 primary missions: search and rescue, marine safety, maritime law enforcement, ports, waterways, and coastal security, and living marine resources. So that all happens out of the Coast Guard station, Sector St. Petersburg here. Across the street, and we're just going to go up just a tad here, Andrew, because I want you to get a shot of this National Airlines. See, you can see the runner coming. All the distance runners in St. Pete know this is where you come to get your extra mileage. So we're going to stop right here. Behind me is Albert Whitted Airport. If you've ever wondered where it got its name, it was named after a dashing, I have to say, you'll see a picture of him in a moment, just really handsome young pilot named James Albert Whitted. He was one of the first 250 naval aviators. So one of the first 250 pilots in the Navy. He was commissioned at the age of 24 in 1917 as the U.S. was entering World War I, and he became the chief instructor of advanced flying at NAS Pensacola, and then later was at the naval station at Guantanamo Bay as well. When he left active duty following the war, he came back to St. Pete and designed and built himself a couple of planes, one called the Bluebird and one called the Falcon. And he would take people up in the skies over St. Petersburg, really to kind of encourage this love of flying. And some of the pictures that we're going to show in just a moment were taken from his plane, the Bluebird. Tragically, he was killed in an accident along with 4 passengers in Pensacola in 1923. He was on his plane that he built, the Falcon, and the propeller broke, and he and 4 passengers died. He was so beloved in the city that they named the airport after him 4 years later. So it had been, John, actually, you'll talk about a little bit about the founding of the airport while we walk on.
Yeah, and we've had that picture of Albert Whitted up there, and yeah, I'll admit he's a handsome guy.
Sorry, John.
This next shot, actually, if it will come up, where are we going here? Is an aerial photo of Albert Whitted in its early stages. You can see the Coast Guard station isn't out there. None of that is built yet, but that is all kind of dredge and fill there. And here is, you can kind of see up on the right side of this picture, an early plane and a car going by, some kind of a celebration, inauguration, some kind of event happening there. The Goodyear blimp was a fixture in its early days at Albert Whitted Airport. And one of the interesting things about Albert Whitted throughout its history has been its proximity to St. Petersburg's downtown area. It was developed at a time when other, older cities were wishing that they had saved land near their urban centers for an airfield. Cities like Cleveland, Chicago had to go back and buy land for airports, whereas St. Petersburg kind of had land and dredgeable area available. But for all of its history, from those early days, every 20 years or so, there's been a question of its use to the city. It always fought in its early days its size limitations. As planes got bigger, the runways needed to be longer. National Airlines was an early airline that set up there, was one of the largest airlines in the country, went on to merge with Pan Am to become the famous large Pan Am Airways. And but ended up leaving for Jacksonville because, again, Albert Whitted was not large enough. Airmail planes served it for a while, and then those had to go out of Tampa. So really, Albert Whitted has always been kind of a hub for smaller aircraft, but still very unique in its proximity to downtown. And every 20 years or so, there's a debate about, is it serving the whole city? And I'll leave that debate for other people. But it is very unique in its proximity to our urban center as far as a place and not being out in a suburb or out in some field somewhere. I'm going to end off with this swimming pool here, which connects the Maritime Training Center to USF St Petersburg, because here it is, close to 100 years later.
Yeah. So we're standing at the pool now that is now part of USF St. Petersburg. It was built, though, for the Maritime Service Training Center. And you'll notice in the upper left of the historic photo, which is from about 1950, you can see a big platform. And they used to have to jump off that platform and, practice abandoned ship. They would actually coat the surface of the pool with oil and light it on fire to teach the seamen how to, swim through a body of water that was on fire, very realistic things that might happen during wartime. When the base was decommissioned, the pool was turned into a municipal facility called the Sunshine Pool, Sunshine something. And then when USF came, it became part of USF and we'll walk this way now, Andrea, became a really popular meeting point for faculty and students. We're walking now through a building. Actually, Andrea, take a view where it says Heller Hall there. This building that we're walking through on the USF St. Pete campus used to be known as Coquina Hall, but just a couple of years ago was renamed for Bill Heller, who was the dean of the campus, essentially the chief executive officer of the campus from 1992 to 2002, and then later went on during a period of great expansion and Then later went on to become a state representative for 2 terms. A beloved human being, Bill Heller. I knew him, was just a wonderful person. And so a couple of years ago, they renamed this building in his honor. Behind me now, you get a better glimpse of Bayboro Harbor. We're going to try and find a spot to stop where hopefully the wind won't be too bad. I want to go right up here, Andrew. So now you can see the yachts. If you look in Andrew, show the brick building in the distance there. That is a former power plant. We'll show you a picture in a few minutes that has these great smokestacks coming out of it. It was built in 1924 by Florida Power. To the right of it, that white cream colored building, now part of USF, but and originally was a warehouse. But in 1982, that was the first home of the Dolly Museum. They were looking for a place to get it out of to get the Dolly, the collection of the Morse family out of Cleveland. Because John, if I remember correctly, you told me Cleveland was too. They were concerned about the art with the pollution in the city, so they got it out.
The collectors had a big plastics operation, and they their collection, their museum, was next door to the factory. And he basically said, I would need a building the size of this building to clean the air for the museum, to keep the art from getting polluted by Cleveland's air. I don't know how much of that was hyperbole and how much of it was fact.
Well, some of our city boosters, lured them down here. So the Dolly Museum was originally in that building. It's now used by the university. But this is Bayboro Harbor, which really until about 1910 wasn't given much attention by city leaders. But around 1910, the city is turning the downtown waterfront into public parkland, but they still want to have a deep water harbor, a deep channel harbor where large ships can come in. There's debate about whether it should be at Demon's Landing, where the railroad pier was, if it should be downtown on the waterfront. William Straub, who was the owner, editor of the St. Petersburg Times at that point, really lobbied hard that they should turn the whole downtown waterfront into public parks, which is what ended up happening. And it was decided that the Deepwater Harbor would go here. So that's when John mentioned the dredge and fill that was used for Albert Whitted. That's where that fill is coming from. They're dredging it out to create a channel so that deepwater ships can get into this harbor. A man named C.A. Harvey, who was an entrepreneurial spirit, kind of saw what was happening, bought up a lot of the land around Bayboro Harbor in the early 1900s. He came here in 1903 from Georgia. He was in the lumber business, bought up a lot of the area around Bayboro Harbor and starts heavily promoting it and selling it. So around the years between 1910 and the 1920s, when we have a huge land boom in St. Pete, that's the airport and doing a frequent business. During the 1920s land boom, we get even more development. And so the neighborhoods of Roser Park, which are beyond us that way, and the Old Southeast that way, are developed during that time. John's going to show you some historic photos of what the shores of Bayboro Harbor looked like before the expansion of USF moved in here. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But Andrew, we're going to turn on and walk this way. I want you to show these halls. I think we've got Davis Hall on the right here and Bayboro Hall on the left. Davis Hall was named after another dean of the campus, USF's first African-American dean, who oversaw the building of the campus activity center and a lot of other growth on the campus, and that died suddenly. And they named this building after him. John, why don't you show those pictures of the harbor and the power plant? You there?
Of course, I muted myself. You're on mute.
Okay.
Yeah, this first one is actually, to date it, it's taken from the Bluebird, from Albert Whitted's plane. So prior
to 1923.
Yeah, so prior to 1923. And you can kind of see, I'm going to kind of advance one picture to zoom in a little. You can see the banks of the harbor are just kind of some low buildings, marine related businesses, but all very small, no large vision here. Here's a great shot of C.A. Harvey. He looks like one of those kind of half drawing, half photographs of a gunslinger in Tombstone, Arizona or something. And he was a big booster in the area of buying property and selling off pieces of it that became the old Southeast. You can see where they've got all these lots platted. Salt Creek still runs through there. Booker Creek comes in there. And they had eyes on this being, the next big neighborhood of St. Petersburg. This next picture is really interesting because this actually sat on the corner by the Pointer Library, where the Pointer Library is today. This is the Hotel Richelieu, and it's hard to imagine something like this down there, but it was kind of one of these typical two-story storefront buildings. The upper floor had 55 hotel rooms that were kind of seasonal, and there was a barber shop and several other things in there. So that kind of gives you an idea of what this area was like before the city sort of started thinking bigger.
And John, I didn't mention that they originally called the area where Bayboro Harbor is Fiddler's Paradise because there were so many fiddler crabs, and the fishermen would come and collect crabs and fish there. So a very different feel from what we see today. Now look at this beautiful landscaping and fountain behind me, and you see in a little bit of the campus as we've walked through. Now, originally, and I think most people don't know this, I think a number of people have been to the USF St Pete campus, but I would venture to guess that very few have been down to where we started at the old Maritime Service Training Station. And that's really where the University of St. Petersburg, or the University of South Florida St. Petersburg started. So after Eckerd College moved out in 1963, Florida Presbyterian, the barracks were used for a variety of sort of educational extension services. They had a library that the state university system would use. They kind of rented out space to various entities, but not until 1965, when USF Tampa has overbooked its freshman classes and has run out of dorm space, do they go, hey, we've got that space over in St. Petersburg. So they put 250 freshmen who had no idea they were going to be stuck over in St. Petersburg, where there's not a lot happening at this time in the 1960s in St. Pete. So they were pretty unhappy about being stuck way out here in the nether regions. But that kind of gets it going, this idea that no, we could have a part of USF here. So they eventually start having classes here. And by 1969, the legislature actually declares it a branch campus of the University of South Florida, the first branch campus in the state university system in St. Pete. A lot of that was, we're going to walk this way. And as we do, Andrea, I want you to film the white building over to my left, because a lot of that was due to the boosterism and the advocacy and the work of a man named Nelson Pointer, whose father, Paul Pointer, had brought him here in the early 1900s, 1912, I believe. Yeah, 1912 he came. His father had bought the majority ownership of the St. Petersburg Times. Nelson Pointer grows up working for the Times. Then he goes away to Indiana University and later gets a master's degree from Yale, comes back and takes over the paper and becomes a huge city booster. He's really the one that's pushing heavily for what he was calling Sunshine University to come on to the old Maritime Services Training Center. Eventually, 1969, it's declared a branch campus. And over the course of the next 10 years, they see the potential, how many students are coming, and they file an expansion plan. And John, you'll show that picture where it shows the campus expanding as it has from what was the Maritime Services Training Center down, which direction would this be? Westward. This is now the library, the Nelson Pointer Library. So that's named for Nelson Pointer, who was such a booster. Ironically, on the day that they did the groundbreaking for the expansion, which began in 1978, Nelson Pointer was here. Another trustee was talking to him, and a trustee says, I've been waiting 12 years to see this day come. And Nelson Pointer says, well, I've been waiting 30 years. That's how long he had been working on bringing this here. He does the groundbreaking that day, that morning, and dies of a stroke just a few hours later. So brought this thing to fruition and then passed on, and the library was named in his honor. Originally, the library was in a different location, but they brought the name over. Across the street is the Piano Man building, which I was convinced I was going to find out was related to Billy Joel somehow. And though I did find out that Billy Joel did host a master class at USF in, I think, the 90s, and signed a piano that was over there. He had nothing to do with this building. This building housed a variety of different businesses. When it was donated to the city and or to the campus, and they refurbished it, they named it after the last business that had been in there for decades, which was a piano man, a piano selling business. So ahead of us is one of the newest buildings on the USF St Pete campus, the Kate Tiedemann College of Business. And you can see it's a beautiful, very modern looking building. Jon, why don't you tell us a little bit about Kate Tiedemann?
Kate Tiedemann, she's in her 80s now, but a few years ago got involved in philanthropy down in Florida after coming down to visit some friends. But she came to the United States in the 1950s as an 18-year-old German immigrant who spoke no English, went for a job interview, didn't even know what happened in the job interview, but ended up getting hired as a housemaid for former Governor Thomas Dewey. As she said, what happened in the interview? They said, you got the job. She ended up becoming a typist for a medical device company, and then kind of moved around to different medical device companies, learning the business, starts her own company, and essentially invents some very critical instruments for eye surgeries, and creates this company, goes around to trade shows and sells her instruments, one at a time at first, but then it just grows to the point where they offered like 1,400 products. She eventually sold that company and did quite well, and has given over $15 million to USF St Petersburg's campus, $10 million to name the College of Business after her, endowed scholarships, and all kinds of things there. But just a really incredible story. And her partner had a successful banking career, and just extremely generous people.
Perfect. Thank you, Jon. We are coming up on our next, and Andrea, I'm going to have you first film that kind of mural painted on the side there so people can hopefully see where we are. Can you read that, Jon? Let me see how it looks on the
camera. It looks pretty good. That's actually just about the best angle I've ever seen of it.
It says Studebaker Distributors. And then, Andrea, if you'll come out as far out to the road as you can to the road without getting run over, don't go in the road, but film up at the top those medallions there at the top of this attractive brick building. I don't know if you can read those, but they say Studebaker. So this was built in 1925, this building. It was once the fourth largest Studebaker dealership in the world. Jon, didn't you tell me it closed very shortly after?
I mean, they opened in like 28 or 29 and closed almost immediately. With the company that owned the chain of dealerships went bankrupt in 1930.
Right, and then it became a grocery store, a restaurant supply store, a thrift store. And then, Jon, I'm going to let you, because you're the one that went down the rabbit hole on this fascinating building. So I'm going to let you tell the story as we cross 6th Avenue South.
Yeah, and I'll have
keep an eye on.
We have an old photo of it from back in its early day, and it has really hardly changed. I was looking for old pictures. Isa, can you make that photo work for us? There it is. And this building really looks so much like it did back when this picture was taken, probably in the 30s. The building, kind of went through a lot of different iterations. It was a thrift store, different, woodworkers and that sort of thing. But back in the 1980s, John Warren, who was a very active preservationist at the time, was interested in buying it for artist loss. And the city was also interested in it because the USF campus was expanding. And they looked at it and they said, no, we don't want it. And so John Warren bought it. And then the city came back and said, yeah, just kidding. We're going to do eminent domain. We'd like to condemn that building. And there was a little bit of back and forth, and lawyers got involved. And essentially, he agreed to sell it to the city with the caveat that it be preserved. And so the city had already lined up USGS to come into that space. So by the late 80s, it had gotten a $1.2 million renovation, did a really beautiful job keeping it in the way it has always looked. And USGS has been in there since like 89, I think is when they moved in. But really a cool building that you could drive by 100 times and not realize, I think almost because it looks so good, you don't realize how old it is and how historic it is.
Well, and those cool medallions are really the only clue as to what it was. But isn't it great that it still says Studebaker up there? You don't usually get, those kind of clues to what a building was. Andrew, film across the street now. I think probably the best, or at least most notorious piece of public art in the city. This is called It Heals Up. It's a piece of public art by a really well-known pop artist named James Rosenquist. Let's come down a little bit, Andrew, so we're not right on the corner where all the traffic is about to come through. But I think a lot of people, like me, refer to it as the Bloody Bandaid because, that's kind of what it is. And it sort of grosses all of us adults out, but I think it delights children, and that was its intention. That's why it was commissioned. The CEO of the hospital at the time, wanted to do something to kind of bring some delight to all the children that were being treated in his hospital. He approached Tom James, the owner of Raymond James Financial, who is himself a very well-known, well-respected art collector, who agreed that he would endow the upkeep and maintenance of any piece of public art that was going to be, affixed to the new building that All Children's Hospital was building. And they approached James Rosenquist, who was a pop artist who had actually never done a piece of public art before. He had gotten his start in New York City doing billboards and then kind of transferred that into pop art. In his heyday, he was, working with the likes of like Andy Warhol and what's the other guy?
Basquiat?
No. Well, I'll think of it later. But a very well-known pop artist living in Arapika, Florida, which is kind of in the Tampa Bay region. So he actually donated his time and his work and the materials. Came on a tour of All Children's Hospital and said, I believe in what you're doing here and I believe in the mission of this piece. And so he donated his time, his work. The original upkeep fund was created by Tom James. And it's still this, delightful piece of public art today. We're going to walk.
Hello? Oh, there we go.
And Andrew, you'll see now there's an empty lot across the street from us. Until just recently, that was USF. It's called Family Services or something. It was like a daycare that was used by people working at USF. Beyond it, you can see All Children's Hospital and then Bayfront Hospital beyond that. This would have been all single-family homes and apartment houses, boarding houses before the hospital expanded and took a lot of this space. You'll next see St. Mary's Hospital. It's actually called St. Mary's Our Lady of Grace, I believe is the full
hospital,
name. This was built during the 1920s boom when, you had just tens of thousands of people moving to St. Pete or at least coming temporarily for the winter season. And accordingly, you have dozens of churches built in the city. This one was done by one of our most famous architects in the city, Henry Taylor, who also designed the Vinoy Hotel, Admiral Farragut, and maybe even more famous than this building is Little St. Mary's, the public bathroom that sits at the foot of the pier and looks strikingly like this building. So much so that there's always been rumors that Henry Taylor wasn't paid for his work on St. Mary's Church. And so when he got the commission for the public bathroom at the foot of the pier, he designed it to look exactly the same as kind of to thumb his nose at St. Mary's Church. That's not true. The bathroom was actually commissioned before the church was. He liked this style, this Romanesque revival style. There's very little of it in St. Pete and really in Florida too. So this is a very noteworthy church. Behind it sat the home of city founder John Williams, a beautiful Queen Anne home built in 1891. He built it for his wife, Sarah. She was his second wife. She was much younger than him. He built it for her in 1891, and then he died the next year in 1892. Sarah Armistead Davis goes on to lead all kinds of organizations in the city and be a big contributor to the growth of the city. But their home was originally just beyond this. Their home was actually moved 200 feet to the west when they built St. Mary's Church. And then later, the home was attached to a hotel was built attached to it called the Manhattan Hotel that was a very popular inn for decades. And then as the city at large started to decline in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the hotel does as well. And eventually in the late 90s, actually, what year did they move it? Yeah, they moved it in the 90s. The owner of the hotel says, I really can't even afford to pay the taxes anymore. I want to make sure I get the year right that they moved it. And she says she's going to sell it. And there's concern that the house is going to be demolished. So there's a movement to move it to the USF St Pete campus, which is what happens. And we're going to go down there and see it just now. Across the street where this kidney care, the dialysis center is today, it's just a lovely little yellow brick building that housed a number of different things. A J&P market, Bryant's beauty shop in the 70s and 80s. It was a restaurant and tavern, hardware store, used books. It's just really an attractive thing to see when you first get off the interstate. And in fact, Andrew, I should point that out. You can see the spur of I-75 coming off straight into downtown. And that really took out a lot of the buildings and put a lot of pressure on things like the Manhattan Hotel. Because, nobody wants to come and stay in a hotel that's sitting right on the interstate. John, do you want to talk real quickly about this field?
Yeah, I've got a few
right here
pictures to go along with this. No, I'm not muted. Can you hear me?
Still got you, John?
Am I here?
Yes, I can hear you, John.
Okay, you can hear me. Good.
It looks like we're still going, but I don't hear John.
Yeah.
Isa, are you there?
Yes, I can hear John.
Oh, we've lost somehow.
Looks like they've lost audio.
You're okay, Mom. Keep going, John.
Somehow she's muted. Here. Anyway, where she was standing at the corner there by All Children's was this house.
Here, let me check my phone and see if they're...
That was called the Endicott House, which is actually still exists down at Boyd Hill Preserve. And this whole area was all populated with these smaller homes, smaller businesses. And you'll see from some of the aerial photos that we go through as we talk about some of the other buildings here, that this area has changed a lot. Some buildings were lost, but some were saved, and Monica will show us those. Here's an old picture of St. Mary's.
Can you let's go ahead and cross. Can you disconnect my headphones?
As Monica and Andrew try and figure out their audio issue, this is the Williams House attached to the Manhattan Hotel. And then there is the Williams House as it's in transit. It had lost that cupola there on the top, but then it was reconstructed when it reached its new location. Here is Monica standing by the beacon. Let me see if Monica is back or not. She's not got her ear pods in. Monica, can you hear us?
Okay, so Isa, send me a thumbs up via text if you can hear me, because I can't hear you guys anymore. I'm going to point out the beacon, what is now called the Beacon on 3rd condominiums, but was originally built in 1963 as the Carlton Towers. It was really the first modern high-rise apartment building that gets built in the city, built in 1963. And you can see it has a very mid-century, okay, she can hear me, very mid-century look to it. Perhaps the most important thing about this building, though, is that right there on that corner is where John and I met. I was living in this building when I moved here to go to USF St Pete for graduate school. I came down the stairs and out onto the sidewalk, and John was walking across the street with my cousin, a professor here at USF St Pete, Ray Arsenault, who did not actually introduce us, John and I, so we just kind of made moony eyes at each other. But this is where our love story started. So I lived here.
It's all true.
In apartments, and then in the early 2000s was converted into condominiums. We're going to walk down to the corner and show where the Williams House ended up. John's going to talk about this block where the beacon was.
Yeah, Isa, make this picture big, because you can see this is where this is an old rendering of the beacon. There is the beacon as it's getting built. It was the first high-rise apartment building downtown St. Petersburg. But if you look in the foreground of this picture where it's completed, you can see that block there to the south is all just smaller buildings. In fact, in the very front of that, there's a white building that has kind of a peak on it, sort of prominent in the very front of the picture. That was the Potter House. There was efforts to save that house that kind of went in fits and starts, but it finally was demolished along with one next door as the university expanded. This is a picture of the Snell House, which actually sat down where the Ovation condominium is, down pretty much where like Wooden Rooster is. Um, and it was moved. So the Williams House and the Snell House were moved to the campus while they were demolishing other historic buildings on the campus. So it's kind of ironic that right next to where the Williams and Snell House sit were two old buildings that they tried to save. There is the Snell House getting relocated down the street to its new location. It houses the honors program and the Florida Studies program and is right around the corner from where Monica is walking right now. That is my last slide. She's right in front of the Snell House.
I can hear her.
Yeah.
I can hear it through her. That's
Yeah.
You're
Are
good
you
to
there,
go.
Mon? Can you hear me?
I don't know why.
Is Monica ready to talk?
I'll stand here.
I just sent her a message. We'll see.
Yeah.
Let me know when he stops talking.
Yeah, he's done talking.
Go.
Okay. All right. I'm getting a go from my
It's live
text
internet.
to finish up about the Snell House. So, the Williams house that I talked about earlier is here. Both the Williams house and actually, Andrew, why don't we come a little further in so you can see the tower. I don't have my headphones in, so I want to stay close to the camera. But you can see the tower that, John, I hope you pointed out in the photos where the tower had gone missing and then they recreated it when they moved it here. Adjacent to it is the Perry Snell house. So in addition to the Williams house in 1993, the Snell house was moved here from the location of where the Ovation condominiums is now. It was on 2nd Avenue North. Roughly where the Wooden Rooster restaurant is now is where this house sat. It was the home, one of the homes, he had several, of one of the most prominent developers in St. Petersburg, Perry Snell, who came to St. Pete on his honeymoon with his wife, who was an heiress from Tennessee, used her money, started buying up land, and really developed much of our city, the area around Mirror Lake, the Old Northeast, Snell Isle. And it was fitting, when this house was threatened, when they were going to tear down those buildings around that block to build the Ovation Tower, ultimately to build the Ovation Tower. This came on for being moved, where they got a grant, they moved it here, and it really makes a great kind of historic, charming little section of the campus. This is actually the home of the honors program now and the Florida Studies program, which is what I came to get my master's, why I moved here almost 20 years ago to get my master's degree, where John and I met. And I think, John, you probably mentioned that there were originally 2 historic homes on where the building next door is, that unfortunately were torn down in the late 80s. But then these were moved here to kind of, make up for the sins of the past. So we still have a taste of what this area would have originally looked like before it became this sort of an educational, innovative complex that we now know as the Innovation District and the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg. So that is it for us today. Thank you for joining us. Sorry we lost you at the end there, and we will see you next time.